39 seconds. That is all it took for 2 catastrophic earthquakes to tear through Venezuela this week, and that disaster pulled the entire world's eyes away from something that was unfolding at the very same moment on the other side of the planet. Because while everyone was watching Caracas, a magnitude 6.9 struck off the coast of northern Japan, and the scientists examining it are refusing to call it an aftershock. They are using a different word: afterslip. A fault that broke wide open back in April, still quietly moving, still loading the most dangerous subduction zone on Earth towards something far larger. Stay with me until the very end, because that one quiet word may matter more than every loud headline this week, and underneath it hides a question that no scientist alive can answer. If a fault that keeps moving in the dark unsettles you, subscribe so you do not miss the moment this develops. Tell me in the comments where you have felt a big one, or whether you are somewhere the next one is overdue. Now let's get into it. Thursday morning, off the coast of northern Japan, the ground moved. A magnitude 6.9 earthquake struck about 50 kilometers down, roughly 31 miles beneath the seafloor, just off the coast of Iwate Prefecture. People felt it across the entire Tohoku region, and the shaking reached all the way south to Tokyo, where buildings swayed and millions of people froze for a moment and waited to see if it would get worse. At least 5 or 6 people were hurt. One woman was injured after she fell. The bullet train stopped. Local rail lines went dark across 2 prefectures. The Prime Minister's office spun up an emergency task force within the hour. And then, because this is Japan, a country that has rehearsed this exact nightmare more times than any other nation on Earth, the official word came down quickly and calmly. No tsunami warning. No damage at the nuclear facilities in the area. Stay alert. Let me give you a sense of what that shaking actually felt like on the ground, because the raw magnitude number never tells the human story. Japan does not just measure earthquakes by magnitude, the energy released at the source. It also uses its own seismic intensity scale, which measures how hard the ground actually shook at each specific place, and it runs from 0 up to 7. In the hardest hit towns near the coast, the readings on that scale climbed into the upper range, the level where, in the agency's own description, a person can no longer stand up and can only crawl, where furniture that has not been bolted down topples over and slides across the room. Now, there was some early back and forth about exactly how high that intensity reading went in the worst spot, with some initial reports running higher than the figure the agency later settled on, and that kind of revision is completely normal in the first chaotic hours. But hold on to that image regardless, because it is the right yardstick. We are not talking about a gentle sway. In the towns closest to the epicenter, this was the kind of shaking that puts people on their hands and knees. The official response moved with the precision of a country that has done this drill 1,000 times. The Tohoku bullet train line, the Shinkansen, halted operations immediately, automatically, the way it is engineered to the instant the first warning hits. Most of those high-speed services were running again by early afternoon, but numerous local train lines across Iwate and Aomori prefectures stayed suspended, with no clear word on when they would come back. The Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, set up a task force at the Prime Minister's office, confirmed there was no tsunami concern, and asked residents in the affected areas to stay vigilant for the possibility of another earthquake of similar size. The Defense Minister went a step further and ordered the self-defense forces to begin aerial reconnaissance over the affected zone, getting eyes in the sky to look for damage that might not be visible from the ground. That is what a serious, prepared nation does in the first hours. It stops the trains, it stands up the command structure, and it puts aircraft over the coast. And it does all of that for an earthquake that, by this region's brutal standards, was almost gentle. By the standards of what this part of the world can produce, that almost sounds like a quiet day. a near magnitude 7 earthquake, and the headline is that nobody died. You could be forgiven for scrolling past it. Most of the world did exactly that. And we are going to talk about why in a moment, because the reason your newsfeed barely mentioned this is its own strange story. But here's the thing I need you to understand before we go any further. The single detail that turned this from a routine jolt into something that made seismologists in Japan sit up straight. It is one word. The scientists looking at this earthquake are pointedly not calling it an aftershock. They are calling it something else. They are calling it afterslip. That distinction is everything. An aftershock is a fault settling down, relaxing, letting go of the leftover tension after a big break. Afterslip is the opposite kind of signal. Afterslip means the fault is still moving, still sliding, still quietly redistributing the colossal forces locked inside it, weeks and months after the main event. And the unsettling possibility that a Tohoku University expert raised on Thursday is that this slow, silent sliding may have been what loaded the gun for the earthquake that just rattled Tokyo. So that is the question this whole video is built around. Underneath the Sanriku coast of northern Japan, a fault that broke wide open back in April has never fully stopped moving. The magnitude 6.9 you just felt may be a symptom of that movement. And the deeper mystery, the one that has people who study this for a living choosing their words very carefully right now, is whether that slow slip is releasing pressure and winding the danger down, or quietly building pressure and winding it up towards something far, far larger. Let me show you why nobody can answer that yet, and why it matters more than almost anything else happening on the planet this week. To understand why this Japanese earthquake slipped past you almost unnoticed, you have to look at what else was happening at the exact same time, on the other side of the world. On the same day, Venezuela was hit by the worst earthquake it has suffered in more than a century. And it did not come as one shock. It came as two, stacked almost on top of each other in a way that is genuinely rare and genuinely frightening. First, a magnitude 7.2. Enormous. The kind of earthquake that levels poorly built structures and makes the ground roll like the deck of a ship. And then, 39 seconds later, before the first one had even finished, before anyone had a chance to run, a second earthquake, even larger, a magnitude 7.5. Not an aftershock. A bigger main shock, right on the heels of the first. Think about that timing for a second. 39 seconds. That is barely enough time to register that the world is ending before it doubles down. Caracas, the capital, was hit hard. Towers came down. Entire walls of buildings sheared away, leaving furniture exposed to the open air. Beds and couches hanging over the street like a dollhouse with the front torn off. People poured out of swaying high-rises and refused to go back inside. The state next to the capital, home to the country's main international airport, was described by officials as a disaster zone. The death toll climbed into the hundreds within hours, with more than 200 people still trapped under the rubble of collapsed buildings. And the count was still rising as rescue teams from half a dozen countries scrambled to get there. It was, by the measurements, the strongest earthquake to strike Venezuela in over 125 years. So I want to be completely clear about something, because it would be easy to twist this the wrong way. When the title of this video says everyone was watching Venezuela, that is not a complaint, and it is not a conspiracy. Venezuela deserved every second of that attention. A catastrophe was unfolding in real time, and people were dying. Of course, the cameras pointed there, but here is the consequence, and it is a real one. While the entire planet's attention was locked on the rubble in Caracas, a quiet, serious warning sign appeared on the other side of the world, and almost nobody saw it. Japan got hit too. And because Japan is so absurdly well prepared, because its buildings flex instead of fall, because its people drill for this from childhood. A near magnitude 7 earthquake there produced a handful of injuries instead of a body count. You cannot compare the two. One was a humanitarian disaster. The other was a whisper. And the cruel irony is that the whisper, the one in Japan, may be telling us something much bigger about what is coming next. The loudest story is not always the most important one. Sometimes the thing that actually matters is the signal you almost missed because something louder was screaming in the other ear. And it was not just Venezuela and Japan. That same window of about a day lit up with seismic activity in a way that got a lot of people online whispering that something planetary was happening. Down in Naples, Italy, the ground was trembling under one of the most watched volcanic areas in Europe. A swarm of small quakes in the magnitude 3 range rattling a region that sits on top of a sleeping giant. And I will admit it, I woke up to my own phone buzzing about a magnitude 5.6 in California. A genuinely big earthquake on a normal week, just one more entry on a very long list that day. And that Italian swarm is not nothing, by the way, because those tremors were rattling a restless volcanic caldera that has been slowly inflating and unsettling the people who live on top of it for years. Venezuela, Japan, Italy, California, all inside roughly 24 hours. It is enough to make anyone ask whether the whole planet is somehow connected, whether one of these set off the others, whether the Earth itself is straining all at once. Hold that thought, because we are going to come back to it and look at it honestly. But first, we need to go back to Japan, and back to that one strange word, because Afterslip is where this story actually lives. Let me explain why scientists refusing to call this an aftershock is such a big deal. Because once you understand the difference, you will never look at one of these earthquake sequences the same way again. Picture the boundary between two of the great tectonic plates as a giant zipper, hundreds of kilometers long, buried under the ocean floor. Most of the time, the two sides are stuck together, locked. The plates are still trying to move past each other, grinding along at about 8 to 9 centimeters a year, roughly the speed your fingernails grow, but the friction holds the zipper shut. So the rock just bends. It stores the strain like a spring being slowly compressed, year after year after year, decade after decade. And then one day, the friction loses. The locked patch gives way, all at once. The spring releases, and that violent snap is the earthquake. That is a megathrust. That is what happened in April, and we will get to April. Now, after a snap like that, two very different things can happen, and telling them apart is the entire game. The first is aftershocks. Aftershocks are the system settling. When a big patch of fault breaks, the surrounding rock gets jostled into a new arrangement, and little pieces of it snap and adjust and pop for weeks afterward as everything finds its new resting place. Aftershocks are the sound of a fault calming down. They fade. They get smaller and less frequent over time. They are, in a strange way, reassuring, because they mean the energy is bleeding off. Afterslip is a completely different animal. Afterslip is when, after the main break, part of that fault does not lock back up. Instead, it keeps sliding. Not in a violent snap, but slowly, silently, creeping along over days and weeks and months. No shaking, no drama. Just the two plates quietly slipping past each other in a zone that should have stopped moving. And here is why that matters so much. That slow movement does not happen in a vacuum. As that patch of fault creeps, it tugs on everything around it. It transfers stress onto the neighboring patches that are still locked shut. It is the fault, still alive, still working, still pushing on its neighbors long after the cameras have left. And we are not guessing that the fault is doing this. We can actually watch it. This is where geodesy comes in, and it is one of the quiet miracles of modern Earth science. All across Japan, there is a dense network of permanent stations locked onto the satellite positioning system, the same constellation that powers the map in your phone, except these stations measure their own position not to within a few meters, but down to the millimeter. So when the land above a fault creeps, even by a few centimeters over weeks, these stations see it. They watch the ground deform in slow motion. That is how scientists know, with hard numbers and not just a hunch, that the region around the April rupture has kept moving long after the shaking stopped. The plates here are grinding past each other at roughly 8 to 9 centimeters a year, and against that slow background, the network can pick out the extra anomalous creep of afterslip and map exactly where it is happening. This is not some exotic, one-off event either. Slow slip, the broad family of fault movements that release energy without a sharp earthquake, has become one of the hottest areas in all of seismology over the last 2 decades, precisely because these dense measurement networks finally made the silent motion visible. Faults, it turns out, have a whole vocabulary between locked and broken. They can creep steadily. They can have slow slip events that last days or weeks. They can produce a low, almost inaudible tectonic tremor. And the Japan Trench, the very boundary we are talking about, has become one of the most closely studied laboratories on Earth for exactly this behavior. So when the experts say afterslip, they are not reaching for a vague metaphor. They are describing a specific, measured, ongoing motion of the seafloor that they can see in the data right now, this week, in the same patch of ground that just produced a near magnitude 7 earthquake. So when a Tohoku University expert in geodesy, which is the science of measuring the precise shape and movement of the Earth, looked at Thursday's magnitude 6.9 and its location, he said something very specific and very carefully worded. He said the earthquake occurred near an area that has been affected by afterslip. And he raised the possibility that this slow slip placed extra stress on that spot, and that the added stress is what set off the 6.9. He was careful. He stressed that this has not been verified. Scientists do not get to be sloppy with claims like this. But the very fact that the explanation on the table is not the fault is calming down, but the fault is still moving and may have just pushed a neighbor over the edge, tells you which direction the worry is pointing. This is the heart of it. A normal aftershock would mean the April earthquake is fading into history. Afterslip triggering a new near magnitude 7 means the April earthquake never really ended. It just went quiet and kept working underground, and reached up 2 months later to remind everyone it is still there. The fault is talking. The only question is whether it is saying goodbye or saying, get ready. Here is where we get to the question that I think is genuinely one of the most important, unanswered questions in Earth science right now, and it is so simple a child could ask it. When this fault slips slowly, is that good news or bad news? On the surface, your gut says good. Pressure is being released, right? The fault is sliding instead of staying locked, so it is letting go of some of that stored strain, gently, without a catastrophic snap. And that is true. Where the fault creeps, in that specific patch, the strain really is being relieved. That patch is, in a sense, diffusing itself. If that were the whole story, afterslip would be a relief valve, a safety mechanism, the Earth quietly letting off steam so it does not have to do it all at once. But that is not the whole story, not even close, because the strain that gets released in the slipping patch does not vanish. Energy and stress do not just evaporate, they get handed off. When one section of the zipper slides forward, it pulls on the sections next to it that are still stuck. It loads them. It adds to the pressure already building in those locked zones. So the slow slip is simultaneously a release in one place and a loading in another. It is calming one patch of the fault while it leans harder and harder on its neighbors. And there is a reason this specific worry sends a chill through anyone who studies the Japan Trench, because we have seen a version of this pattern before, right here, at the worst possible moment. In the weeks before the catastrophic 2011 earthquake, scientists who went back and re-examined the data found that the fault had been doing something unusual. There were signs of slow, creeping movement, and a migrating sequence of small quakes drifting toward the spot where the giant rupture would eventually begin, as if the fault were quietly unzipping in slow motion before it tore all at once. Nobody recognized it as a countdown at the time. It was only visible in hindsight after the disaster had already rewritten the coastline. That is the haunting precedent hanging over this whole situation. The last time this trench produced a monster, the monster announced itself first with exactly the kind of quiet, slow, easily overlooked movement that scientists are now watching beneath Sanriku. I am not telling you this to say history is repeating. I am telling you because it is precisely why the experts refuse to wave the afterslip away as harmless. They have been burned by underestimating the silent signals from this fault before, and this is why scientists cannot just tell you it is fine. Imagine the fault as a long line of people holding a heavy rope in a tug of war. If one person in the middle suddenly steps forward and gives up their grip, that section of rope relaxes. But the load they were carrying does not disappear. It snaps onto the shoulders of the people on either side of them. Now, those people are straining harder than before, closer to the moment they too lose their grip. That is afterslip. The slipping section feels relief. The locked sections next door feel the opposite. They get pushed closer to failure. So when you ask, is the afterslip beneath Sanriku releasing stress or building stress? The honest, maddening answer is yes. Both, at the same time. It depends entirely on which piece of the fault you are standing over. And the thing that keeps seismologists up at night is the specific geography of who is getting loaded. Because if this slow slip is leaning on a section of fault that is still fully locked, still fully loaded after centuries of grinding, still capable of breaking all at once, then the afterslip is not a relief valve at all. It is a fuse. A slow burning fuse running toward a part of the fault we very much do not want to wake up. Seismologists actually have a way of quantifying this handoff, this leaning of one patch onto another. They model how the slip on one section of fault changes the stress on every neighboring section, adding pressure here, subtracting it there, drawing a map of where the fault has been pushed closer to failure and where it has been relaxed. And the unnerving pattern, seen again and again around the world, is that big earthquakes tend to beget more big earthquakes precisely in the zones that got loaded by the first one. A rupture relieves stress in the patch that broke, then dumps that stress onto the adjacent locked ground, and sometime later, that newly loaded ground is the place that goes next. It is not magic, and it is not mysterious. It is the bill coming due, passed from one section of the fault to the next. Now layer the afterslip on top of that. A normal earthquake transfers its stress in a single instant, and then it is done. But afterslip keeps transferring stress continuously, for weeks and months. A slow and relentless loading of the neighbors that does not stop when the news cycle moves on. Every day the afterslip continues, it is leaning a little harder on whatever locked patch sits next to it. And if you want to know why scientists are watching this particular sequence so intently, that is the reason. The April earthquake did not just release its energy and walk away. It left behind a fault that is still actively pushing on its surroundings, every single day, in slow motion, in the dark. And the magnitude 6.9 that just hit, that is the part that should make the hair on your neck stand up. We do not know which one it was. It might have been the afterslip relieving pressure, a patch finally letting go in a controlled way. Or it might have been the afterslip doing the other thing, pressing on a locked neighbor until that neighbor cracked. From the outside, in the first hours, those two scenarios look almost identical. a near magnitude 7 earthquake. The difference between them is the difference between this being the end of something and this being the warning shot before the beginning of something much worse. And to figure out which, we have to go back and look at how this fault got into this state in the first place. This earthquake on Thursday did not come out of nowhere. It is the latest chapter in a story that has been building for more than half a year, and once you see the whole sequence laid out, the afterslip starts to look less like an oddity and more like the connective tissue running through all of it. Go back to November of last year, 2025. Off the Sanriku coast, the same stretch of ocean we are talking about now, a foreshock sequence began. And this was not a couple of little tremors. Over the following months, this zone produced more than 160 earthquakes above magnitude 4. Among them, 5 separate events above magnitude 6. The strongest of that swarm hit magnitude 6.8 back in early November. That is a serious earthquake on its own, and it was just one tooth in a much longer comb of shaking. The fault was waking up, rattling, clearing its throat. Then, in December, a magnitude 7.6 earthquake struck near Aomori, about 140 kilometers to the northwest of where the action would later concentrate. Another major event in the same general system, in the same restless few weeks. And then came the big one for this story. On April 20th, 2026, the Sanriku earthquake. The Japan Meteorological Agency first announced it as a magnitude 7.7, then refined it down to 7.5 as more data came in. Which, by the way, is completely normal and is exactly why you should never panic over the first number you see in the opening minutes of a quake. It was a thrust earthquake on the Japan Trench, about 35 kilometers deep, off the city of Miyako in Iwate. It sent an 80-centimeter tsunami into the port at Kuji. It shook hard enough to register the strongest intensity readings of any of these events in a town in Aomori. It injured around 10 people. And it triggered something the Japanese authorities take extraordinarily seriously, a formal advisory warning that a still larger earthquake could follow. If you have been following this channel for a while, that April earthquake should ring a very loud bell, because we covered it in depth when it happened. We talked about how it struck frighteningly close to the source region of the catastrophic 2011 disaster, and how the foreshock question hung over the whole thing. That earthquake was the main shock. This is its world, and we are still living in it. Because after April, the fault did not go back to sleep. In May, a magnitude 6.3 struck the Tohoku region, shaking the area again. And the government's own earthquake research headquarters said something crucial. They said that the cluster of earthquakes that kept occurring after that large April event was being driven by what they called post-seismic deformation. In Iwate Prefecture, post-seismic deformation. That is the technical phrase for the ground continuing to move and reshape itself after the main rupture. That is afterslip, named and acknowledged at the highest official level. It is worth slowing down on that April advisory for a second, because it tells you how seriously the Japanese take this exact situation. Japan is the only country in the world that runs a formal system for warning that a large earthquake might be followed by an even larger one in the same place. They built it specifically for this subduction zone after 2011 taught them the most painful lesson imaginable, that a giant earthquake can sometimes be foreshadowed by a smaller one in the days before. So after the April main shock, the authorities did not just issue a generic "be careful." They activated that special advisory, the one that says for the next week, the odds of a still bigger earthquake here are elevated. Keep yourself in a position to escape immediately. They had issued that same kind of advisory only a small handful of times in the system's entire existence. This is not a routine bulletin. It is a rare, deliberate signal that the experts are genuinely concerned, and April was one of those moments. And notice what the foreshock swarm in November really represents in hindsight, because this is the uncomfortable mirror image of the whole story. In the months before the April main shock, this zone produced that long crescendo of quakes, more than 160 of them above magnitude 4. At the time, nobody could say for certain whether that swarm was just noise, or whether it was the fault loading up toward something big. Then April came, and in hindsight, the swarm looked an awful lot like a warning that had been hiding in plain sight. So now, with the fault still slipping and still producing near magnitude 7 events 2 months after the main shock, you can understand why no one in Japan is treating Thursday as just one more tremor. They have seen this movie before. They know that sometimes the rumble before the main event only makes sense after the main event has already happened. So look at the whole chain. A foreshock swarm in November. A magnitude 7.6 in December. The magnitude 7.5 main shock in April. A magnitude 6.3 in May. And now a magnitude 6.9 in June, sitting right next to the afterslip zone. These are not 5 unrelated coincidences scattered across 8 months. They are 5 chapters of a single story. The fault entered an active phase late last year, and it has not left it. The afterslip is the thread stitching them all together. The fault staying alive in the gaps between the big jolts, constantly reshaping where the next concentration of stress is going to land. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable part. Because there is a very specific place this stress could be landing, and history tells us exactly what happens when it breaks there. When scientists started looking at where Thursday's earthquake sits, and where the afterslip is pushing, they pointed to a specific historical analog, and it is not a comforting one. Back in 1994, this same offshore Sanriku region produced a magnitude 7.6 earthquake, a big one. And the source region of that 1994 quake sits on a shallower part of the plate boundary than Thursday's earthquake did. That detail sounds technical, but it matters enormously because the shallower parts of these subduction zones, the parts closer to the trench where the plate first starts diving down, are exactly the parts that can generate the most dangerous tsunamis when they break. Shallow rupture near the trench shoves the seafloor upward and shoves the entire water column above it, and that is how you make a wave that crosses an ocean. So here is the scenario that officials actually raised, in plain language, and I want to be precise because this is not me speculating. This is the assessment on the table. Because of Thursday's earthquake, because of the afterslip, and because of the other slow slip events happening in the surrounding area, one possible outcome is that an earthquake of a similar scale to that 1994 event could occur. Or, and this is the line that should stop you cold, an even larger one. A magnitude 8 class earthquake. An 8. I need you to feel the weight of that jump, because our brains are terrible at earthquake math. The magnitude scale is not a normal scale, where 8 is just a bit more than 7. It is logarithmic. Every single whole number up the scale represents roughly 32 times more energy released. So a magnitude 8 is not slightly bigger than Thursday's 6.9. Run the math up the scale, and a magnitude 8 releases something on the order of 45 times more energy than the earthquake that just stopped the bullet trains and swayed the towers in Tokyo. 45 times. The same fault zone, the same stretch of coast, but a release of energy in a different universe of destruction. To really understand why this specific stretch of coast is so dangerous, you have to picture the machine underneath it. Off the coast of northern Japan, the floor of the Pacific Ocean is diving down and sliding underneath the edge of the continent, plunging into the planet at the boundary, marked by 2 great undersea canyons, the Japan Trench and, to the north, the Kuril Trench. This is a subduction zone, the most powerful earthquake engine the Earth has, the same kind of machine that produces every magnitude 9 on the planet. And the geometry right here is part of what makes it so productive. Near the epicenter, the descending plate bends sharply, steepening from a shallow angle to a much steeper dive, only about 80 kilometers in from the trench. That bend, that change in shape, concentrates stress. It is a place where the rock has to break and rearrange itself over and over again as the plate forces its way down, 8 to 9 centimeters every year, never stopping, never resting. And this exact stretch of coast has been writing its violent history for well over 1,000 years. The records here go back to the year 869, to an ancient Sanriku earthquake and tsunami that devastated this same coastline more than a millennium ago. A disaster that, eerily, scientists later used as a kind of preview of what 2011 would do. In 1933, the region produced another massive Sanriku earthquake, this one of a different type, a violent snapping deep inside the diving plate rather than along its upper surface. Then the 1994 event we just discussed. Then, 2011. This is not a coast that gets the occasional surprise. This is a coast with a long, documented rap sheet of generating some of the most destructive earthquakes and tsunamis in human record again and again, century after century. So when the afterslip beneath it starts loading the locked patches, you are not watching an abstract risk. You are watching a proven, repeat offender being pushed. And lurking behind even that is the real ghost, the one every person in Japan thinks about and nobody wants to say out loud. 2011. The Tohoku earthquake, magnitude 9.1. A monster that broke a shallow stretch of this very same plate boundary, drove a tsunami tens of meters high into the coast, killed nearly 20,000 people, and triggered the meltdowns at Fukushima that the entire world watched in horror. That is the ceiling. That is the worst case that this subduction zone has proven, within living memory, that it is capable of. And now you understand why one specific line in Thursday's news coverage was not just a throwaway. No damage to nuclear power facilities in the area. Of course they checked first. Of course that was one of the very first things reported. Because everyone remembers Fukushima. Everyone remembers that the earthquake itself was survivable for most, and it was the wave and what the wave did to the reactors that wrote the real tragedy. So when a near magnitude 7 hits this coast, and the headline includes, "The reactors are fine," that is not filler. That is a nation exhaling, just a little, while keeping one eye fixed on the water. The Japan Meteorological Agency put a number on the broader risk, too. Major earthquakes of magnitude 7 or above, they said, typically occur in this area every 10 to 20 years. Sit with that. Every 10 to 20 years. This is not a once-in-a-thousand-year freak zone. This is a part of the planet that is reliably, regularly capable of generating the kind of earthquake that just hit, and worse. And right now, it is in an active phase, with the ground still slipping underneath it. So the warning from the agency was blunt and specific. Anyone living near the Japan Trench and the Kuril Trench, that dangerous subduction boundary, should stay on alert for further earthquakes for up to a week. Because the fault has shown its hand, and the hand is still moving. Now, let me come back to that thought I asked you to hold, because I promised we would look at it honestly, and a lot of you are thinking it right now. Venezuela, Japan, Italy, California, all shaking inside about a day. Is the planet connected? Did one of these set off the others? Is the Earth straining all at once like some giant living thing? I want to take this question seriously, because it is a completely natural thing to wonder, and the people asking it are not foolish. When you see 4 major seismic events cluster in 24 hours, pattern recognition kicks in hard. Our brains are built to find connections. So let us actually run it down instead of just waving it away. Here is the physics. Could an earthquake in Venezuela trigger an earthquake in Japan? The honest answer is no, not in any direct way, and the reason comes down to distance and mechanism. When a fault ruptures, it does send seismic waves rolling out through the entire planet. Those waves really do travel all the way around the globe. And there is a real documented phenomenon called dynamic triggering, where the surface waves from a very large earthquake can, as they pass through a distant region, give a tiny nudge to a fault that was already sitting right on the absolute edge of failure. That part is genuine science, but the key words are tiny and already on the edge. The effect is small, it is fleeting, and it only matters for a fault that was about to go anyway. It is the difference between a feather landing on a mountain that was already crumbling. It does not reach across an entire planet and yank an unrelated, stable fault into a magnitude 7. The plate boundaries under Venezuela and under Japan are thousands of kilometers apart, sitting on completely separate tectonic systems with no physical pathway to coordinate with each other. So why does it feel like everything is connected? 2 reasons, and they are both about us, not about the Earth. The first is the background rate. The planet is always shaking. On any given day, somewhere on Earth, there are multiple magnitude 5 earthquakes, and a magnitude 6 or 7 somewhere in the world is a regular weekly occurrence, not a rare one. We just do not hear about most of them, because they happen under the ocean, or in remote places, or in regions that handle them well. The shaking never stops. It is the constant background hum of a living planet. It helps to put a real number on that background hum, because most people have no idea how restless the planet actually is. In a typical year, the Earth produces well over 100 earthquakes of magnitude, 6 or larger, and somewhere on the order of 15 or more of magnitude 7 or larger. That works out to a magnitude 6 somewhere on the planet every few days, on average, and a magnitude 7 roughly once or twice a month, every month, year in and year out. Most of them you never hear a word about, because they rupture under the deep ocean, or beneath sparsely populated ground, or in places that build well and ride them out. The shaking is constant. It is the planet breathing. So when 4 notable earthquakes happen to fall inside the same 24-hour window, that is not the Earth coordinating a global event. That is ordinary statistics doing what statistics do, clustering by pure chance, the same way a fair coin will sometimes hand you 4 heads in a row. The second reason is attention. On a day when Venezuela is on every screen on Earth, suddenly everyone is primed. Everyone is watching. Everyone is sharing every tremor on the planet, and so we notice all of them at once. The cluster is not the Earth doing something unusual. The cluster is us paying unusual attention to the Earth's perfectly usual behavior. The quakes feel connected because our awareness of them got connected, all funneled through the same news cycle on the same day. And while we are clearing the air, let me deal with the other thing that always shows up in moments like this, because it always does. Every time a big earthquake hits, the videos start flooding in. The most dramatic, terrifying footage you have ever seen. Buildings folding, water surging, the ground splitting open. And here is the uncomfortable truth. In a breaking earthquake, a huge amount of the most spectacular video going viral is fake. After these recent Japanese quakes, authorities had to formally ask the major social platforms to take down misleading content. Footage that was actually from the 2011 disaster or from other older earthquakes, repackaged as if it were happening now, mixed in with fully artificial, computer-generated clips designed to look real and rack up views. The lesson is simple, and it is worth burning into your memory. In the first hours of a disaster, the most cinematic clip in your feed is very often the least true, and the real story, the one that actually matters, is usually the quiet, unglamorous one, like a slow slipping fault that does not make for a dramatic video at all. And yes, I will say it before you do, because someone always asks. No, this was not caused by some secret weather machine, some hidden array of antennas reaching out to break the Earth on command. I know that theory shows up under every single one of these. So let us just put a number on it and move on. The energy stored in a locked subduction zone, the strain built up over centuries across hundreds of kilometers of rock, is so far beyond anything any human transmitter could produce that it is not even in the same conversation. We are talking about a gap of many, many orders of magnitude. No machine on this planet steers a tectonic plate. The forces involved dwarf every power source humanity has ever built. Combined, the Earth does this on its own. It always has. The honest story is scary enough without inventing a villain. So after all of this, the Afterslip, the sequence, the ghost of 1994, the shadow of 2011, the 8-class scenario, you are probably waiting for me to tell you the big one is coming. And this is exactly the moment where I have to be the most careful with you, because this is where it would be so easy to lie. Here is the truth. After that April main shock, the Japanese authorities, working with the Cabinet Office, did something they only do when they mean it. They issued a formal advisory, and they said, openly and publicly, that the chance of a magnitude 8 or larger megaquake in that window had increased. Specifically, it went up by roughly a factor of 10, tenfold. And when you read tenfold, your stomach drops, because that sounds like a near certainty. But listen to what tenfold actually means here. The background chance was about 1/10 of 1%. Raised tenfold, it became about 1%. 1%. That is the real number behind the scary headline. The risk genuinely went up by 10 times, and it is still, in absolute terms, low. I am not telling you that to make you stop caring. I am telling you that because the truth is more useful than the panic. The science is saying something very specific, and it is not the big one is coming tomorrow. It is saying the risk is elevated, not imminent. Those are different things, and the gap between them is where you should actually live. An elevated risk means the dice are loaded a little more heavily than usual for a defined period, in a defined place. It does not mean the number has come up. After a large quake, there is something on the order of a 10 to 20% chance of another major earthquake in the same area, and that elevated window is concentrated in the first 2 or 3 days and then fades over about a week. That is why the Prime Minister asked residents to remain vigilant for another quake of similar size, and why the agency drew that 1-week alert line. Not because catastrophe is scheduled, but because for a short window, the odds are worse than normal, and being ready costs nothing. And I want to underline why that 1% figure deserves real respect, even though it is small, because this is where a lot of people lose the plot in one direction or the other. Some folks hear 1% and laugh it off entirely, and some hear tenfold and start packing the car. Both are wrong. Here's the right way to hold it. A 1 in 100 chance of a magnitude 8 class catastrophe inside a single short window is genuinely high when you remember what is on the other side of that coin flip. We are not betting on whether it rains. We are talking about a 1 in 100 shot at an event 45 times more energetic than the earthquake that just stopped the trains and swayed Tokyo, striking a coast that has buried tens of thousands of people inside living memory. A 1% chance of that is not nothing. It is, in fact, exactly the kind of number that justifies a formal national advisory, an emergency task force, aircraft over the coastline, and a request that hundreds of thousands of people stay ready to move. Low probability and high stakes is the most misunderstood combination in all of risk, and this is a textbook case of it. Small odds, unthinkable consequences. You prepare anyway. This is the part the doom headlines and the panic videos always strip out, and it is the part that actually keeps people alive. The honest posture here is not terror. It is preparation. The people of Sanriku, of Iwate, of Aomori do not need to flee their lives. They need to know where the high ground is, keep a bag packed, secure the heavy furniture, and not be standing on the beach watching the water if the ground heaves again. That is it. That is what elevated, not imminent, looks like in practice. Respect, not panic. And honestly, the fact that Thursday's near magnitude 7 earthquake produced a handful of injuries instead of a graveyard is the whole argument for that posture, written in real time. That outcome was not luck. It was decades of building codes that make structures flex and absorb a shock instead of snapping. An early warning system that can stop a bullet train and freeze an elevator in the seconds before the shaking arrives. And a population drilled from childhood to drop, cover, and hold on without being told. Compare that to what an earthquake of similar raw power does to a place that has not built for it, and the gap is measured in thousands of lives. Preparation is not a substitute for the fault staying quiet. But it is the difference between a frightening morning and a national catastrophe, and Japan just demonstrated, yet again, which side of that line readiness puts you on. The same calm machinery that handled Thursday is exactly what stands between this coast and the far larger event the Afterslip may be building toward. But I am not going to pretend the deeper unease just goes away, because it does not, and you would not believe me if I tried. Because underneath all the careful, measured, responsible language, there is a fault out there that is still moving, still slipping, slowly, silently, in the dark, miles beneath the Pacific. A fault that has produced a magnitude 7 or larger every 10 to 20 years like clockwork. A fault that broke catastrophically in 2011 and rewrote a nation's history. A fault whose afterslip may be quietly leaning, right now, on a locked patch that has been storing energy since before any of us were born. And the single most honest thing the scientists have said through all of this is also the most haunting. They cannot tell you when. They can see the fault moving. They can measure the slip down to the millimeter. They can map the stress and name the scenario and raise the probability and issue the advisory. And they still cannot tell you whether the next chapter comes in 3 days, or 3 years, or 30. The afterslip is a signal everyone can see and no one can fully read. It is a countdown with no numbers on the clock. So while the world's eyes were locked on the rubble in Caracas, the most important thing that happened on Earth this week may have been the quietest. Not the collapse you could see, but the slip you could not. A fault off the coast of Japan. Still alive, still working, still whispering. And the only question that really matters is the one nobody on this planet can answer yet. Is it winding down, or is it winding up? The fault knows. It is just not telling. And until it does, all any of us can do is watch the water and listen for the whisper underneath the noise.